Welcome back to Real Shift. My name's Joe. Today I'm going to be doing an official review of Dracula, the 1931 classic Universal monster movie. This is the next movie on my bucket list. If you haven't seen my previous review, I did a review recently of Chinatown. Basically what I'm doing is going back and watching classics that I may have missed and giving them a first look and hopefully reviewing them and hopefully enjoying them and letting you know what I thought about them, simply because there are no new movies to review at the present time due to the obvious pandemic that's going on in the world right now. So this particular review will be about Dracula, the 1931 classic directed by Todd Browning and starring Bela Lugosi and Dwight Frye. I'm cheating a little bit with this one, to be honest, because I have seen parts of this movie before, specifically the beginning of it, in Dracula's castle mostly, but I've never actually watched it in one sit down from beginning to end. So this is definitely still a first in my personal opinion. I do know that even the little bit of footage that I saw before, I enjoyed it and I always wanted to actually watch the whole thing, and I just never got around to it. So now I'm taking the opportunity to do that. I never saw the part where he goes to London, and I'll get into more of that in a minute as far as like how I feel about that particular portion of the movie. This is actually adapted from a stage screenplay. It's not adapted directly from the Bram Stoker novel. That's mostly because I think, first of all, the Bram Stoker novel is a bit of a hard read from what I understand. I've never read it personally, but it's a bit of a hard read. It's hard to adapt because it's told through all these like journal entries or whatever. So you haven't seen a real authentic adaptation of the novel before. I think the closest might have been Francis Ford Coppola's version, which I also enjoy, by the way. But even that deviates quite a bit from it. So this movie obviously deviates from it because it's actually based on a stage play script, which I found kind of interesting. There's two versions of this movie, actually. There's this version, which I'm going to be reviewing today, and then there's the Spanish version. Now, back in the day, I guess Universal would shoot a movie twice. They used the same sets, they used the same costumes, but they would have different actors playing the roles. They would basically have an English version and a Spanish version. And from what I can tell, at least through my research, the Spanish version is actually more well regarded. Bela Lugosi aside, because he's obviously the iconic Dracula, which again I'll get into in a minute, but the overall movie itself, a lot of people think the Spanish version is actually better, simply because they had the opportunity to, I guess, see the footage that was shot during the day for the Lugosi version, and then they would see what works, see what doesn't, and then make it better. So from a pure filmmaking standpoint, it appears that they had a better movie, but that's up for debate. And I'm not going to really talk about the Spanish version yet, because as I said, I haven't seen it yet. But I am going to talk about the English version today. The film stars Bela Lugosi, of course, as Count Dracula, and he immigrates from Transylvania to London, and through the course of his travels, he of course feeds on living people, because that's what vampires do. And one of the particular women that he takes interest in is actually the fiance of one of the main characters, which is Jonathan Harker, and of course vampire mayhem ensues. So Lugosi's iconic performance is often the thing that's praised most about this movie, and I'm probably going to do the same thing, to be quite honest, because his performance is just that memorable and that iconic. You can't think about Dracula without thinking about Bela Lugosi. His speech patterns, his look, his whole blank stare as he stares into the camera, everything about him set the standard for what Dracula is moving forward. Far as I know, no one has really been able to compete with him on any level as far as like being a high mark in pop culture history. Like, he thrusted Dracula into pop culture with his performance. Like, anytime you hear about Dracula being parodied or being imitated, or if you're just sitting around with your friends and someone does a Dracula voice, they're doing Bela Lugosi's version of the character. And that says a lot about him, that he was able to take this already iconic character from a very well-respected and famous book and make it his own. And that's exactly what he did. And in fact, he didn't just make it his own, he stole it. It's his now. So yeah, Bela Lugosi's performance, I think is definitely the high mark of this movie. I will say, though, Dwight Frye's performance as Renfield is also pretty high up there. It's very out there, it's very over the top, but it works for the movie, to be quite honest. It could be taken to be able not to be taken seriously, like it's a bit comedic in parts, but in a weird sort of way, it works because he's just so unhinged that it's creepy. And to see him go from like this regular guy to this crazy person, it's again, it just shows you the destructive force that Dracula can have on a person. So I think Dwight Frye's performance gets a little bit overshadowed by Lugosi, but I think he did a fine job as well. I really enjoyed the cinematography in this movie. There's a lot of long, lingering shots that just make you feel uneasy throughout it. Dracula's introduction, for instance, when he's coming down the steps, it's shot from very far back, and it takes a while for you to move up on him, so it kind of draws out his I guess his introduction, or the first time you see him. Another instance was when like the brides are approaching Renfield in his room, and they're just slowly walking towards the camera. It's just very creepy and long and drawn out, and I think it adds something to the movie to linger on these creepy shots like that. Another thing that adds to the uneasiness of these shots, and even those scenes that I just talked about, was there's no music in this movie. And whether it's done for creative reasons, because the creative team decided not to do it, or most likely because they were just limited in what they could do, because this is the early stages kind of sound in film, which is most likely the reason why they were limited in what they could do. But it works. Like, whatever reason it was, whether it was someone's genius idea or just through limitations, like, it works, and it makes the movie that much better to have no music in it. One, it's iconic in a sense that, and unique, because it is unique. It's not common that you watch a movie or a film and you don't have music in the background. There's nothing to set the mood. All the mood is through the visuals. And I think that's really cool that they were able to do that and do it well. The set design, I think, is pretty iconic also. I'm saying the word iconic a lot because there is a lot of things in this movie that I think influenced other things. But specifically, some of the set design in here, like Dracula's castle, is just so beautifully made up. It's crumbling, it's falling apart, there's cobwebs everywhere. You wonder how anyone could even live there. But it's so memorable, and it sticks with you, and that's what made me want to watch the movie, was seeing that opening scene where he enters the castle, and it grabs you. It really does. It pulls you in. Another interesting set area that they had, or set piece they had, was probably the streets of London, because it's very foggy, it's at night, and I think it just, again, it adds to the creepiness of it. It feels like a Jack the Ripper type situation with Dracula out there stalking random people in the streets. It just has a very old school, nostalgic feel to it, and I really like that. The prop effects, there's a couple moments in the movie where they have these prop animals, and mostly bats or rats, bats or spiders. They look super fake. They have not aged well, the props in this movie, the prop effects. But at the same time, it kind of works because it just adds to the charm, I guess, of the movie, because you know that it's an old movie. You are willing to forgive some things because you know they were working with limitations. But it just adds to the charm of it. It's something similar to when you watch a Godzilla movie and you see people in suits instead of CGI. Like, the suits just work better. Practical effects always, no matter how bad they are, in my opinion, they always age better than bad CGI. Like, I would rather have bad practical effects over bad CGI any day. Because if you look at some movies, say like from the mid to late 90s, that had bad CGI, like, it's almost unwatchable at this point. Whereas this movie, it was made in 1931, yes, the props are kind of cheesy, but in the same token, it works, and it again, it adds a little bit more of appeal to the movie, because it makes you think like what they were able to do with so little, and I can appreciate that for sure. I should also point out that this was probably the origin of one of the classic horror tropes, and if I haven't made it clear already, I think this movie was a great influence on a lot of horror movies moving forward. Like, it kind of set the standard for horror, to be quite honest. But one of the big tropes that I noticed was the whole a crazy person in town is warning the traveler not to go to the creepy place, but then the traveler, of course, ignores him and goes anyway. Like, that's been in so many horror movies. It's been in Friday the 13th and Wrong Turn, and it was parodied in Cabin in the Woods, and many others, but those are just three off the top of my head. But that whole horror, I guess, trope, something that is just common in horror movies and you almost expect to see, I feel like it originated in Dracula. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong, it may have happened before this, but I don't know for sure. But it's the oldest movie I remember seeing it in. So I thought that was really cool too, to see how it influenced horror movies even in the modern age. I will say it's relatively violence free, and that could just be because it was made in 1931 and things like blood and gore obviously weren't as acceptable back then on screen. It could be because of the limitations, again, that they had from a filmmaking aspect. But either way, as far as like him biting his victims, most of that is done off screen. And again, I think it's a less is more approach, similar to Alien. Like, what you don't see is scarier than what you do see. And whether they meant to do it this way or wanted to do it this way or not, it works, and it makes the movie better. In fact, it probably helped the movie as far as aging, because then you don't have more bad effects or more bad, makeup or whatever the case may be shown on screen. Now it's just left to the viewer's imagination, which is a lot of times the better option. Because anybody watching this movie with half an imagination can understand what's happening even if you don't show it to them. So I thought that was actually something, again, that added to the charm of the movie, to not show anything. The only thing I will say is it does make it a little bit anticlimactic when you don't see the death of Dracula. You only kind of hear about it through dialogue, that he was staked through the heart. You see like the beginning of it with Van Helsing standing over him and he's got the stake, but then it kind of like cuts away and then you just hear that he's jammed the stake through his heart. Like, again, you get the idea, you know what he's doing, but you don't actually see it. I think with a villain like Dracula, you'd like to see that, but it's not a huge deal, but it is a little anticlimactic that you don't see it. If I had to pick out one thing that maybe I could nitpick about this movie, and there's not much because I love the movie, to be honest with you, but I guess when the story moves to London, it does drag a little bit. It kind of like the pace of the movie kind of comes to a halt quite a bit, and then at the end it picks back up again. But the whole portion in London where he's kind of interacting with Van Helsing and Jonathan Harker and all that, like, it does drag out a little bit, and I think modern audiences could possibly be turned off by it because you need bright, flashy things to keep them interested sometimes. But in my particular case, it's a nitpick for me. It's not really that big of a deal. Like, I actually enjoyed it. There's really not anything about this movie that bothered me, but that's one thing I guess I could say that maybe hasn't aged, or it wouldn't hold up in modern cinema, I guess you could say. But it works for me, so that's all that matters. Overall, I think Dracula is a worthy addition to my collection. I actually bought the Universal Monsters Essential Collection. It has Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Phantom of the Opera, and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I'll probably be reviewing more of these because I don't think I've seen many of them. Maybe Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, but I'm not really sure. But this is definitely something I'm going to be covering over the next few months, possibly. I'm going to be doing some stuff with the Universal Monster movies, if of course the viewers are interested. But as far as Dracula goes, I highly recommend it. You should check it out if you haven't before. Any film lover would probably adore it, to be quite honest. And I'm glad I checked it off my bucket list. It's something that I've been wanting to check out for a while, and now I finally have. And next week, I'm going to be doing a bit of a surprising bucket list film. It's something that I'm quite frankly a little bit, I guess, embarrassed to say, especially as a horror fan that I haven't seen before. It's a very famous, very popular horror movie, and it's something that I probably should have seen already. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for it. Just a little teaser there to let you know that something else is coming up next. But as far as Dracula goes, let me know what you think about Dracula in the comments down below, if you've seen it or if you plan on seeing it after this review. Please, as always, like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you right here next time on Real Shift. Thanks for watching. Peace out.